This meeting has been convened for consideration of committee stage of the Gaming and Lotteries Amendment Bill of 2019. Now, before we begin, members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And I'd also remind people to switch off their mobile phones. As you well know, they interfere with the sound recording equipment. We are joined by the Minister of State at the Department of Justice and Equality, Deputy David Stanton, and his officials, and you're all very welcome here this afternoon. Would the Minister like to make some opening remarks before we address the Gaming and Lotteries Amendment Bill? Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for the opportunity, and colleagues on the committee as well. The amendments I have proposed that this bill makes to our laws, it comprises an interim reform measure, so it's interim. And while it is limited, it will have the effect of modernising and clarifying the provisions of what is, as matters stand, and I'm sure everyone agrees, greatly outdated legislation. Work on comprehensive legislation and regulatory reform that will include the establishment of a new licensing and regulatory authority for gambling has commenced in my department. However, it is a mammoth task and it will take some time to bring these proposals to fruition. And I don't expect that a revised general scheme of gambling control bill will be presented this year because it's such a huge undertaking. There are no government amendments proposed today, Caoimhghín. But I am looking forward to the committee's examining of my proposals, and I look forward to responding to the amendments proposed by deputies. And I hope with the cooperation of all sides that we can facilitate the swift passage of the bill. As always, I welcome the opportunity to engage and to with colleagues here and to learn from what people have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Stanton. Thank you. So we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of it all now straight away. And Section 1, there are no amendments in Section 1, so the proposition is that Section 1 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Caoimhghín. Section 2. I draw your attention to the grouping list. You will note that there are 5 groupings, 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And that leaves, of course, amendment number 11 as the only standalone amendment in the amendment paper. So, Section 2, amendment number 1 in the name of Deputy O'Leary. 1 and 2 are related and will be discussed together. Deputy O'Leary, please.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose this is an amendment, I suppose, that's partially exploratory, and I suppose just to see the Minister's view on it, I'd be interested in it. I suppose I was contacted by the organisation who represents the private members' clubs, and their concern is that, well, it isn't the Minister's intention that this legislation apply to them. They are concerned that the definitions such as they are at the minute, that it isn't that gaming without a valid permit or licence will be a criminal offence. Therefore, that their premises would be considered to be places that there was a criminal offence happening, and it's not possible for them to apply for either the gaming licence or the gaming permit. So their concern is that this will eliminate them, and I suppose there is a view that they need a form of bespoke regulation and licensing to deal with that particular sector. My understanding is, as I say, the Minister believes or isn't intending that, but they are concerned that there is a need for legal clarity as to whether or not this legislation applies to them.
Caoimhghín, Deputy O'Leary. Minister, would you like to respond? And then I'll open it up to other members.
Yeah, of course, Caoimhghín. Thank you. I want to thank the Deputy for tabling the amendments, and my response is similar to responses I have actually given to representatives of a private members' club on the text he has submitted. Just want to give some background. I made the point repeatedly during various stages of this bill that the existence of such clubs arises on foot of constitutional protection. Members' clubs are not governed by the current 1956 Gaming and Lotteries Act, nor by this bill. Thus, and according to the advice of the Office of the Attorney-General, there is no need to include the Second Amendment in the bill. I'm told it would risk confusion and perhaps invite legal challenge. With regard to the Deputy's First Amendment, to the best of my knowledge, many of these establishments are not member-driven clubs, for example, as for example a normal sports club might be. The membership is frequently not a stable feature. It may vary considerably from night to night. And you could ask the question then, who on that committee would be legally responsible for ensuring payment of any taxes to the Revenue Commissioners, or ensuring adherence to any money laundering laws, or what are the visitors to the premises do not engage in excessive gambling? Who on the committee would direct a sharing of any surplus made by the club between all members? Who might share the losses? Many of these establishments also hold themselves out to be casinos. I am not in favour at this time of any measure that would facilitate casino operations by the back door. If we went down this road at this time, these establishments would not be subject to any licensing or regulatory constraints. And I'm also fear that gaming arcades operating in areas where no local authority resolution is in place under the 1956 Act might be tempted to avail of the proposed exemption, with the attendant negative impacts I've already outlined. Now, Chairman, I fully intend to address the issue of licensing and regulation of casinos in the context of the major reform work underway. That, I would contend, is the appropriate place to deal with this matter. At that time, clubs would have the option to apply for a casino licence under regulation and so on. So they are the 2 points I want to make. The First Amendment is proposing, is talking about governing by a committee, and that's it. It doesn't go any further than that. And you know, so and the second one then, again, as I say, we feel neither of them are needed. It could actually open up all kinds of unintended consequences here. As it stands, there's constitutional protection for these private members' clubs, as they call themselves. That's what they are. And the advice is that, not to accept the amendments, not to support them at this time.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Leary. And then I'll follow up with Deputy O'Callaghan and any other member who wishes to address. That's the grouping amendments 1 and 2 together. Deputy O'Leary.
I think the Minister needs to consider amendments for report stage for this, because, while I take the point, and in terms of these clubs, they're well-run clubs, and they're clubs that are a bit fly-by-night, and you could have people coming in and joining up on the night and all the rest of it, right? So there's big issues there in terms of some of the casinos. Whereas some of them are, I'd say some of them are better run and would be, I suppose, would manage their members well, and there would be, as you say, a bona fide private members club. But there seems to be a bit of a contradiction to my mind in stating that, you talk about unintended consequences, but all the unintended consequences arise similarly from leaving the situation as it is. And it seems to me that in the context of that it could be a criminal offence to organise gaming without a valid permit or licence, that, would it not make sense to bring forward as much as possible into this legislation a form of licensing for this particular sector and put it into this bill ahead of the gambling control bill? Because, as I say, they're concerned that there's great uncertainty there. All the unintended consequences that you talk about could equally apply as things stand. So I think there's a justifiable call for clarity and reassurance there. And I think the best way to do that is if the Minister brought forward a regulatory framework for that particular sector within this legislation for report stage. I think that's what should happen.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy O'Callaghan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I think it's welcome that we're trying to update our legislation on gambling. I mentioned that during the second stage debate. Obviously, this is a very unregulated yet highly competitive industry. And I think any of us who have been in touch with or have been contacted recently by individuals who are affected by the proposed legislation will be aware that it is unregulated yet very competitive. I suppose just in respect of the legislation generally, I think we all agree it would be preferable if we had very detailed legislation regulating the whole area of gambling and imposing a gambling regulator that could regulate issues such as private clubs, casinos, whatever they are, in a consistent way. But I understand we don't have that in this legislation. I commend the Minister for bringing forward some amending legislation. I can see what he's trying to do. In terms of Donnacha's amendments 1 and 2, I had considered putting down amendments in this format as well, similar ones, because I was also contacted by, I think it is the GLAI. There's lots of different organisations here. I didn't put them down for reasons I don't need to go into. Obviously, their concern is that they believe that if this legislation is going to be enacted, that they will now they'll find themselves outside the parameters of it. I don't know whether that's necessarily so. I know they've got legal advice to say that. But I think what it does reveal is that we need to regulate all areas of the gambling business, and at present it appears to be the case only some are going to be regulated. I note what the Minister says in respect of private members' club. He seems to think it's not necessary for them to be dealt with in this legislation since they're not covered by it. I think there's a lot of strength in that argument, considering that they accept they aren't regulated by the 1956 Act. So I suppose why would an amending piece of legislation affect them? But I think we need to, on these issues, I'll give consideration to them as well. I may put amendments down at report stage, Chairman, so I'm just saying that. But I think, as Donnacha said, it might be beneficial if the Minister gave some further consideration to it before report stage.
Thank you, Deputy Callahan. Deputy Chambers, please.
Thanks, Chair. Now, look, just reflecting on what my colleague said as well. I mean, I suppose I commend you for taking the plunge. This is the first piece of legislation in this area in a long time, and I think that's welcome as a start. I suppose my question is that a lot of the issues around addiction, around regulation, around properly dealing with the huge amount of activity that's totally outside the scope of the current legislative space, and also the total lack of enforcement of the existing legislation is a huge issue. So I'd just like to get an update on where we're at with the big piece of legislation. Has it commenced drafting? Because for me that's where the solution lies here. And but I as a minister, you've tried to take this on. I understand it's complex, and but I do think that needs to be accelerated. So thanks.
Yes, Deputy Chambers, and I will come to you, Minister, in a moment, and you can respond to each of the deputies in turn. Deputy Thomas Pringle, please.
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose coming to this being a new member of the committee here, and so I just want to. I mean, I take what you say in relation to that. Your opinion that this has been dealt with under or will be dealt with by later legislation, and that's what you intend to do. But the problem is that legislation probably when's it going to come, or will it come? Or what's your time scale for it? I suppose, Minister, that's what I'd be asking, because I think it's vitally important. And and the private members clubs or whatever. I mean, I think gambling is a huge problem in Ireland, and it's bigger than drink or anything else, I think. And we do need to tackle it. And I commend you for taking these steps maybe now to tackle it. But I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering how long your timescale is on happening in the future in relation to this. And I'm just wondering then as well, maybe would this affect, or what they're talking about, would affect, like, say, GA clubs that are doing poker classics or gaming classics or something like that there? Is that the same kind of thing that we're talking about? Or is it more, this is organised businesses, more so that I think that's...
Thank you, Deputy Pringle. Deputy Sean Sherlock, please.
Thank you, Caoimhghín, and I too welcome the Minister's statement in respect of the needs for further legislative solutions around the regulation of gambling, and particularly in relation to the licensing and registration of casinos. I think we all in this House would like to see a compendium of legislation that deals with all of the issues, and particularly in the online space now, where mobile technology effectively is moving at such a pace that you regulate for a particular space, and you're soon outmoded by dint of advances in technology. So I think that if we can take an overarching view, I just wanted to seek clarification in respect of this particular amendment. And I note the comments of the Minister in respect of the 56 Act, and I just wanted to get confirmation again from the Minister that the bill does not speak specifically to private members' clubs. So therefore, could it be said, and I'll be guided by yourself, Chair, could it be said that you are, in effect, by dint of supporting this amendment, making new law, if you were to seek to amend the Gaming and Lotteries Act? But I do welcome the Minister's statement in the round.
Thank you, Deputy Sherlock. I think that's all indicating at this point. Minister of State Stanton, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman, and colleagues. Thanks for the questions, and I'll do the best I can to respond. If I miss something, you might remind me. Deputy Pringle asked about GA clubs and so on. These amendments have nothing to do with any of those, so there's no concern there. A number of colleagues asked about timelines and stuff. I did say in my opening remarks that we wouldn't see the heads of the bill this year. I'm hoping to have them early next year. Not only have we to draft very complex legislation, as Deputy Sherlock has alluded to, and it is extremely complex, and it's actually almost changing by the month. There are more things happening. But on top of that, we have got to set up an authority with maybe 100 people there. It's going to be very expensive and very complex to make sure we have all the right skill set in place. So that work is ongoing at the moment on both of those, and there's no point in actually just passing legislation without having the regulatory authority in place to enforce it and to regulate it and to research it and so forth. So there too are ongoing. So early next year I would hope to have the heads of bill prepared and ready to roll, and at the same time we are working on the structure of the authority, what it's going to look like. And as soon as we have that kind of information ready, I would certainly be interested, Chairman, in coming forward committee here and getting views of colleagues as to how that's what we propose to do there. And if people have suggestions, I'd certainly be interested in listening to them at that time. So that gives you an idea of where the legislation for the main bill is at and where we are with the authority. And there are two mammoth tasks, and they have to happen together as well. It's not just one or the other. Now, with respect to private members' clubs, my understanding is that if all of us here decided to form a private members' club, that under the Constitution we can actually go away and have all this gambling and so on and so forth, provided we're members of a private members' club. It's under what I think is understood as free association, so we can actually do that. And that's what these clubs in effect do. They're private members' clubs, they're private, and they're made up of members who are on a list, and they come in and they do their business. Now, they're also businesses as well, by the way, and they do need regulating. And when the main legislation comes forward, there will be an opportunity for them to apply for what will be in the main legislation, will be a casino licence, which will be regulated. And this whole area then will be taken up at that stage. But if we take these amendments on board now, we're actually recognising these as bona fide casinos almost, if you will. And that's something that I'm slow to do now at this point in time, because if we did that, we're actually moving into regulation, and we're actually, if you like, recognising these as bona fide casinos. And that's something that I think none of us want to do right now when we don't have the regulation in place. We'd also be inviting, in a way, other groups to come forward and to apply to become casinos as well. So this legislation would actually, in effect, could have the impact of doing that. The committee itself here isn't defined as such as to how it's made up, what's it to do, how it's going to be structured, and all that kind of stuff. And there are other things in here too. So I would ask maybe Donogh O'Leary, and certainly I'm always open to consider report stage, and if colleagues have suggestions or questions, I'm open to that, and I've listened carefully to what the Deputy has said. But certainly the request I heard was that, yeah, if at report stage, between now and report stage, which is going to be in the autumn, other issues arise, I'm certainly open to doing stuff then. But right now, as presented, I would contend that it doesn't fit into the current bill which is very much an interim measure, and it has other unintended consequences that I would be concerned about. And when we do this, I want to do it properly, under the full gamut of robust legislation, which covers everything, as I think Deputy Sherlock said as well, and also having a regulatory authority in place to enforce the law as it stands, and to research it, and to investigate what's going on out there, and to ensure that casinos at that time, if they, and I've heard that some casinos, in other jurisdictions, casinos are quite profitable, but they're in very large countries. In the UK, I think they're not, the big ones haven't occurred. And I think colleagues have said as well that a lot of this is moving online. and an awful lot of stuff is going online, which is where a lot of our attention is being focused as well. Again, when we talk about gambling, we always, it always comes up, and quite rightly so, the issue of the problem of gambling and the addiction. Now, you could argue that, and it has been argued that any of us here has a right to go out and to gamble our money if we want to. It's a free country from that point of view. But if somebody has an illness or an addiction, and I've said it before, that becomes a health matter. And those people with that, they possibly need treatment, they possibly need therapy and counselling. And I think we should be focusing our attention on regulation. Can go so far with respect to protecting and safeguarding. But if someone has an addiction, I think we've got to be careful, and we've got to recognise that, yeah, that person has an illness, a sickness that needs counselling and therapy and professional help from that point of view. We can do a certain amount in regulation, in safeguarding, and there are a whole load of things that we've discussed previously, and I've been at this for quite a number of years now, since we did the hearings, Chairman, in 2013, when the last heads were produced. Some of the stuff works, some of it doesn't work. As I say, we just have to be careful when we talk about addiction. We can do a certain amount to make it less attractive, to maybe make it less glamorous and all that kind of stuff. Also, we have to be careful that we make it fair, that when gambling occurs, that it's fair, so that a machine that is tabulated and regulated properly, and that the odds are correct, and that punters, when they go in and when they actually gamble, that it's actually fair to them from the point of view of a business transaction, if you like. So there are the reasons why at this stage I'm certainly open to reconsidering anything at report stage that colleagues bring forward, but these amendments at this time, I'm afraid that my advice is not to accept them.
Thank you. And Tara, Deputy O'Leary, please.
I suppose I agree with an awful lot of what you said there. I agree entirely in terms of the significant damage you can have, and we all have the same, I believe, probably, objectives in this committee in relation to this legislation and future piece of legislation. But I just want, and I won't press it, I'd ask the Minister just maybe to consider it over the summer, right? But just to understand, I suppose, the argument that is being made. So the Minister is saying that this legislation, they're not governed by the 56 Act, therefore it doesn't affect them. So if the Minister is correct that this doesn't affect them, will all the arguments around unintended consequences apply all the same? By the same token, somebody could tomorrow morning go away and set up that same private members club that you're talking about, and all the same unintended consequences that might exist if you were to explicitly exclude them could equally apply. But the Minister isn't right, and they are covered by this. And the argument that they are covered is that, right, up till this legislation, it wasn't to the same extent an offence to be involved in gaming without a gaming permit or licence. It will now be an offence, and whether or not you have a constitutional right to freedom of association, that doesn't entitle you to break the law in that environment. So that's the concern. So if the Minister isn't correct, then, and they are included, well then they close down. So look, and there's jobs and all the rest of it involved in that. So I just think that I would like if the Minister could, in the department, take whatever preparations are happening with the Gambling Control Bill and grab that part and put it in here, because I think otherwise it's unfair to the people whose jobs are involved in these businesses, because there is an uncertainty there that I think needs to be addressed. But I won't be pressing the amendment. I am withdrawing it.
Thank you, Deputy O'Leary. Yes, Deputy Fitzpatrick.
So listen, I welcome you. You mentioned the word regulation 3 or 4 times, and I do. Now, the thing is, I meet a lot of people that do have problems with gambling, and they've nowhere to go. So can I ask you a question? What investment are you going to do to help people that has addictions with gambling? Now, I believe that the bookmakers and people involved with the gambling business are contributing money towards the psychiatry and that there. But I see a lot of advertising lately about sex and about bullying and all on TVs and that there. But this addiction is going on a long time. And you're coming out now and you're talking about changing the whole system. But what are these people that needs the help? Have you plans going forward about looking after people that has addictions?
Part of the actual Gambling Control Bill will be the establishment of a social fund, a levy on the industry, which will be used specifically to help people that have gambling problems. problems with gambling and that have addictions, and also to research the whole area as well, which is also important, and to provide information and education to people about the dangers of gambling. But as I said at the very beginning, if someone has an addiction issue, then that's a health issue. And my colleague, Minister Byrne, is responsible for looking after addictions, including gambling addictions. I note that there is a private fund that's been established recently by some elements of the industry to make funding available to some of the addiction services, specifically ring-fenced for gambling. And that's something that's happening out there, but it's independent of me and of the department. We're not involved in that. But anybody who is a problem gambler, who has an addiction, I would advise that they would go to a therapy centre and get assistance and meet a therapist or a counsellor and get help from that regard. It's a health issue at the end of the day, and the Department of Health are leading on that and doing some good work on that.
Thank you. Yes, Deputy Fitzpatrick.
Minister, please don't take it the wrong way, but I think you're passing the buck here at the moment. Is because if you went to Minister of Catherine Bones and you asked her, your department has a responsibility, and I think that there should be. You mentioned a levy. If you are going to charge a levy, your department and the Department of Health should work very, very closely together to make sure that these addicts are being looked after. And to me, I think this is going on far, far too long. I will be honest, I gamble 4 times a year. I actually love looking to golf, and I gamble the 4 majors. I put a wee flutter on. And that's probably where it all starts and everything else. But unless we get an advertising campaign out there and explain to people the problem, same with drink, the serious issue with gambling. Because in fairness, I don't have a problem with gambling. Same way I'm a pioneer, I don't have a problem with drink. But I do realise other people do have problems and other people do need help. But if the warning signs right there at an early stage, I'm looking at TV for the last number of years, I haven't seen nothing warning people about the addiction of gambling. But yet again, when people are talking about the problem in Italy about sex, I see advertisements about sex, I see advertisements about bullying. Why don't the Department of Justice and the Department of Health work together and highlight the serious issues that people are having with gambling? And maybe that might stop people at an early age. Because if you go back now the moment, years ago, the biggest problem we had in this country was smoking. Now all of a sudden, obesity and diabetics are actually a bigger killer than the smoking. So people work so hard on the smoking, and then all of a sudden we realise now we have problems with other things. So I'm just saying, I believe prevention is the best cure. And Minister, I would just like if your department would work a wee bit closer with the Department of Health and the levy and the money's coming in to spend that money in helping the addicts.
Well, I thank Deputy Fitzpatrick, and Minister, of course you will reply. But it's just I need members to stick to the amendments going through the process. This is a select committee on a specific bill. Allow Deputy Fitzpatrick make his points. Minister, would you like to respond?
I'll be very brief, thank you. As Deputy Chambers rightly pointed out earlier on, this is the first piece of legislation since 1956 dealing with gambling. And I have worked hard, and a lot of us here have worked quite hard to get this to this point. The gambling levy isn't there yet because the main piece of legislation isn't there yet. But when it does come in, that will be there. The Deputy makes some very, very good points. I will contact Deputy Byrne. I've spoken to her on this already. We have carried out some studies on this, and there's another ongoing at the moment, which I'll be talking about later, on the prevalence of gambling in the jurisdiction, which is quite enlightening. And we look forward to the results of the new study when it's made available, the prevalence study. But the Deputy does make some interesting points. We should be doing more to educate people, to inform people, and to I suppose, warn people about the dangers here and how they can get help if they need it. So I thank the Deputy for his comments and take them on board. Thank you.
Start. Deputy O'Leary, you're withdrawing your amendment? Yes. And reserving the right to resubmit, I presume, at report stage.
Correct.
So the amendment is withdrawn, amendment number 1. That is the only amendment that has been tabled in section 2. So in that case, the question I must put is that section 2 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Caoimhghín. In section 3, there's one amendment, amendment number 2, already discussed with one. How stands the amendment, Deputy O'Leary?
Withdrawn, but as I say, I'll ask the Minister to consider this over the summer if he can, and the arguments submitted. But yeah, withdrawn is what is related.
Okay, and has already been discussed, so we won't be opening that again. Withdrawn. There are no other amendments in section 3. I therefore put the question that section 3 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Caoimhghín. There are no amendments in section 4, so the question is that section 4 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Caoimhghín. In section 5, there are 2 amendments, both in the name, I beg your pardon, of Deputy O'Callaghan. 3 and 4 are related and will be discussed together. Deputy O'Callaghan, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chairman. These amendments seek to amend section 5 of the bill, which in itself seeks to put in a new section 14, replacing the section 14 that's in the 1956 Act. And when you go back and look at the 1956 Act, you'll see that section 14 is part of part 3, which is dealing with licensing of amusement halls and fun fairs. And I suppose we've all become aware of how unusual the legislation is in this area, because certain local authorities could opt in to this part of the 1956 Act. Some of them have, some of them haven't, which means that there's different systems operating throughout the country at present in respect of amusement halls and fun fairs, which I suppose is unusual from our legislation's point of view. The purpose or the reason for the amendments was out of a concern of people spending too much money on gambling. And I suppose the legislation which exists at present under section 14 says that the stake in each game will not be more than 6 pence per player. That's what it says at present in the 1956 Act, which is still the law. And I think it says that there will be no one can win more than 10 shillings. Now, that may have been amended subsequently, but I still think it's still extremely low. What I was seeking to do was I know the Minister has decided to put it in at €10 and for a stake and €750 for a prize. I can understand the logic of that. I suppose the purpose of my amendment was to try to prevent people from spending money on gambling. However, I'm conscious of the fact, and since I put down the amendment, I've been contacted by people who own arcades who say, well, listen, this is going to be very unfair at them because there's other people who can gamble online and there's no restriction on the bet they can put down online, and why are they being restricted under this new regime in terms of the amount that a person can gamble on a machine. It is a further example of how complicated this issue is. So what I propose to do is I'm going to give it further consideration. I'm not going to push these amendments at committee stage here. I will consider them further for report stage. I think the Minister should do the same. I'd be interested to hear what the Minister has to say in response to it. But clearly we need to update the legislation so that it's meaningful. And if we are going to put in meaningful what would they call stakes and prizes, well then they're going to have to be policed, and I'd just be interested to hear the Minister respond as to how he thinks that's going to happen.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. Deputy O'Leary, would you like to make a contribution now or wait for the Minister to reply?
I don't mind.
Whatever.
Yeah, I think I'll speak now, if that's all right.
You speak now, you have the floor. Yeah.
I was going to support Deputy O'Callaghan's amendments. In principle, I suppose I agree with them. I think probably, again, what needs to happen after the summer is I think there needs to be a fair bit of consultation. I think that includes, obviously, people involved in the business, but I think importantly, people involved in dealing with the gambling addiction. And I take the point that Deputy O'Callaghan makes in terms of the fairness and the equal playing pitch for online and land-based, but there is something about, not that I understand the science or anything like that, but there's something about the dynamic of the slot machines that is sort of, I don't know, aggressively and compulsive in terms of that kind of behaviour. So I do think it's reasonable that there are maximum stakes, and I think we need to make sure that the stakes are right. Obviously, I would say in practice, I don't think that 3 cents is necessarily what's applied in reality at the minute, but having said that, it's a huge increase from the rate that's in the legislation to the rate that's proposed in this bill here. I think we certainly need to look at revising it down from 10. I think we need to examine that. We'll certainly view that favourably. Just to flag though as well, just I suppose on a technical issue, and I'd like if the Minister would examine this. As I say, I would have supported the amendment, but if it's not being pressed, that's I suppose Deputy O'Callaghan's prerogative. But my understanding is that the way that it has been interpreted, that every line within a game is strictly speaking a game. Therefore, you could have 25 lines and you could have a tenner on each of those 25. So what we would consider to be a game might actually be a maximum of 250. So I think that needs to be examined. If you can imagine your matrix of different lines or your fruits and all that kind of stuff, that actually potentially the maximum stake is substantially larger than what's officially in the legislation, because each line is a game, because you can win in each of those different combinations. Same as, I don't know, Lucky 31 or whatever, you can win in several different combinations. So each of those is a game. Same way that each line in a Lucky 31 is, strictly speaking, a separate bet. So, Minister, I'd like if you could examine that. I just think we need to make sure that it's right, and that involves, as I say, consultation with industry, but also with people involved in dealing with gambling addiction, and people particularly who have experienced that whole dynamic with the slot machines and so on.
Thank you, Deputy Leary. I'll continue on just at this point, given that Deputy O'Callaghan has indicated withdrawal. Minister, if you would note the different points members raised. Deputy Chambers, I think, was next. No? I beg your pardon. Sorry, but Deputy Pringle was ahead of you, Colm. No, he wasn't. I beg your pardon. You were next. Yeah.
And that's why I just, sorry,
I had to look at my list.
Just a short, first of all, I have to say in advance, Donnacha's knowledge of lines and cross lines and everything is much better than mine, because I haven't a clue. You lost me about halfway through there. But I would say to the Minister, I think there is a very good value in Deputy O'Callaghan's amendments. He has obviously decided to withdraw them for the moment, but it is, I suppose, this whole process of when you're looking at something like an arcade, I think that's referred to in the process as an amusement arcade or whatever, as to whether or not you're regulating something of an activity that is gambling. I do accept the point that other people involved in the industry make, and they make themselves, that there is no other comparable. You can buy a lotto ticket for €2 and win, 250,000. You can buy, so there is no other real stake equate to winning. But I do think there is something about the addictive type of gaming nature and the actual process of an amusement arcade that makes it worthwhile to look at the type of general idea as to how much that maximum payout versus stake should be. I think the 750 is a bit too generous, I have to say, from my own perspective, but I would be interested to see maybe what you're thinking as Minister on it.
Deputy Brophy, Deputy Pringle, please.
Thanks, Chairman. And I'm just interested in where the €10 and the €750 come from, and how you've arrived at those figures. Like this, 35 years ago in Caoimhghín, I could gamble £2 when the stake was 2.5 pence, and so. There was no enforcement. But basically what I'm saying is that there was no enforcement of the law. How do we know there's going to be any enforcement of the law now as well? So if the law says €10, I'm 1,000% sure that the next day you'll be able to gamble €100 in the establishments, because I know the way they work, and that's the problem with it. So I'm more interested in how you arrive at those figures, but also I'd be more interested in seeing how it's going to actually be enforced and actually made workable. Because I think the figure of the €10 and €750 is more than enough, but it will be a lot more in reality.
Thank you, Deputy Pringle. Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick, please.
Thank you very much. I do agree that we had to have a look at the stakes. I do agree we had to have a look at the prize money. But I'm just looking down here. It says here, look, a person who holds a gaming licence should not accept a stake from a person under the age of 18 years, right? Minister, what enforcement is being done to make sure that these gaming places are not taking money from people under the age of 18? Because I would be honest, I don't hear of any enforcement being done whatsoever. And this is part of the addiction about young people being, getting into these premises and these companies or these gaming organisations taking money from young people and that. So it's written being done. It's the department now. Is it the Garda of the Sheikh? What's actually happened? Prevention. I said earlier on when I spoke to you, prevention is the best cure. But It's okay reducing say, the stakes and the prize money, but what are we doing to stop young people getting in and putting money on these gambling, whether machines or betting that there? So,
Deputy Fitzpatrick's question. Deputy Sean Shearer, please.
Very briefly, just to welcome the withdrawal on the basis of a further discussion on this, because I think that if we're going for if we're going from 0.03 pence or threepence to €10 per spin or per game, it's a significant increase. But it still points to the fact, and this is something that we have to consider as a house, if you will, as a legislature, the exceptions that could be created no matter what type of figure you put on the cost per game and the prize money, and whether or not in legislating for specific figures that no matter what figure you put in, even if it's significantly low, that you don't drive people into other forms of gambling, and that point has already been made. So I support the withdrawal, but it just, I think, proves that the advocates from the public health point of view, people we've heard in the last few days, Mr. Barry Grant and Dr. Colm Brophy and so on, that they have created a very legitimate case in terms of these specific figures, and I think we have listened to them in that regard.
Thank you, and Tara's thought.
Thank you very much. I hear a lot of questions there. Let me see if I can go through them again. Just on the actual Deputy Fitzpatrick there asked about the under 18. Now we are actually making an offence under the Act for anybody it will be an offence for gambling under 18. So that will be illegal. It won't be allowed anywhere. That's the first time that's being done. So and there are in section, I'll draw your attention to section 18 of the bill, where the offences and the punishments are laid out very clearly. So there are consequences if people break the law in this area, and they're there in section 18. Enforcement, obviously, is a matter for the enforcement authorities, Gardaí and others. I just want to say that the amendments proposed by Deputy Ó Caoláin relate to the maximum stakes and prizes that may be paid for on a gaming machine at a licensed amusement arcade under the terms of Part 3 of the Principal Act. Now, the only role for the Minister for Justice and Equality under that part is in relation to stakes and prize amounts. Part 5 of the bill substitutes a new Section 14 for that section of the 56 Act. The amendment concerns essentially the updating of maximum allowable stake and prize amounts. These are increased, as has been said, from 3 cents and 50 cents to €10 and €750. Deputy Pringle asked a very good question. He said, how did we arrive at these figures? And, there is no science here, really. I have seen people inside in arcades sitting with bags of coins, just feeding the machines all day, with sandwiches and flasks inside them. So if someone has an issue with respect to gambling, you could argue that whether it's €2 at a time or €10 at a time, they'll keep going until the bag of money is gone. And that's an issue that comes back to what some deputies said earlier on about problem gambling and addictions and stuff, which is another area, and it's a hugely important area. It has also been mentioned, I think, by Deputy Ó Caoláin that there are actually people who are working in this area and who are employed in this area. And you could argue as well that, any of us have a right, as Deputy Fitzpatrick says, he gambles 4 times a year. We won't do a roll call, Chairman, I don't know what the rest of us do. But, people actually have a flutter every so often, and some people gamble a bit more than others. But some people have an addiction and have a problem. And they need help. But I think we should be careful that, and it has been said as well, that the stakes and prizes are totally unrealistic and out of date, as has been said here by Deputy Pringle as well, and acknowledged, as they stand at the moment legally, completely out of date. So we have to bring them up to some form of realistic model amount. And we have also, by the way, put in a new regulation making power in section 14.2 for the Minister to amend stake and prize amounts. So the Minister of the day could actually, by an SI from now on, can actually increase or decrease, as the case may be, and that's obviously laid before the houses of the Oireachtas. So if it's found, for instance, that whatever figure we finally arrive at here is not working, then the Minister of the day can change that in cooperation with the houses. In the past, the stakes and prizes were locked into legislation, and there was no primary legislation in this area since 1956, so it was locked in there at 3 cents and 50 cents. And again, Deputy Pringle has, I think, alluded to what was really happening on the ground out there, which is another story. So we're trying to actually bring it up to something realistic. If somebody goes in, and the 750 that's being proposed here is the maximum amount that can be won. That's the maximum amount that can be won. And obviously that probably won't happen that often. We know as well that if people are to gamble, that they want, some kind of an incentive or a thrill or to do it. And by having a realistic prize, then people will be inclined to say, well, I'll have a go here and I'll have a bit of fun. It stops being fun when it becomes a problem. And there's a serious line there that we've got to, people have to say, I'm going to stop here. And I'll gamble so much, I'll go in and so on in the arcades around the place. Just for information, Chairman, the Revenue Commissioners, I'm told, issued 12,113 gaming machine licences and 94 licences for gaming premises in 2018. But in the past 2 years, they've undertaken a major enforcement drive against unlicensed premises and machines. And I very much support this effort and hope that it will deal with issues. My own proposals seek to make it clear that licensed gaming machines should only be located in licensed gaming arcades where a local authority resolution is in place. And again, I would hope that Revenue and Guard enforcement efforts will continue to target unlicensed machines and lead to their removal from public houses, takeaway food shops and other such locations. This particular stake and prize amount has been actually in the public domain for almost 2 years now, since we first published the proposals. And I do welcome at this time, the first time I think that it's been examined, and this is what this process is about. Some colleagues in the Senate did actually raise it as well as a question. So I am open to again looking at this over the summer, but I have to be careful that we have it, that it's realistic. And as I say, we are putting in the provision that it can be changed by ministerial order if it's found to be too high. Can I say as well that I think some colleague, maybe it was Deputy Brophy, maybe Deputy Chambers, said that there is a thrill to the arcades. I'm not sure who said that. When you go into the arcade, there's a thrill in doing the stuff. But there's as much thrill now in gaming and these things, and it's silent and hidden. And I'm far more concerned about the migration to online and how we deal with that. And it's not going to be easy. And it's far, far more, I would contend, being lost on these and on online than in any arcades, where they're limited. They're limited in their opening times and their locations, whereas the online isn't limited at all, and it's open 24/7, and and that's where we're putting a lot of our efforts at the moment into see later on how we can deal with that. So I understand that the actual amendments are being withdrawn, but I agree to look at it again and maybe to communicate with colleagues so that we can arrive at a situation where that we can agree on, maybe on some figures. But we'll certainly give it careful thought over the summer. And so that's basically it. Thank you.
Deputy O'Leary has indicated, but Deputy O'Callaghan, your amendments, would you like to respond first?
Yeah, I will respond briefly. Thanks very much. It's interesting to note, under the 1956 Act, slot machines were prohibited, and then that was changed in 1970. And I suppose what we're talking about here is what we would refer to as slot machines or gaming machines. And I know subsection 2 of the proposed new section 14, Minister. It says the Minister may by regulation vary the amount specified. So, I'm not expert in trying to identify what's the appropriate amount that will be effective in trying to tackle compulsive gambling, But I would have thought that's something that you need to look at. It may be the case that you don't have to specify the amount in the primary legislation, and you could just leave it for ministerial regulation, because in subsection 2 you've identified that you can do that. But I think it's something that needs to be looked at, and I take your point about the fact that even if we do say that nobody can place a bet more than €2 into a slot machine, there's nothing to stop a person sitting there all day putting in €2 after €2 after €2. I would be interested to know what is the stake that's put into these slot machines in arcades at present. Presumably it has to be coins, But there's a problem out there. Nobody wants to stop summertime arcades where people go in and have a bit of fun. But what we do want to stop or try to deter is compulsive gambling. And I would have thought, however, probably the bigger place where that can occur is online, but we need to do something. But we'll be withdrawing them anyway, and you might give consideration to them, and I'd say we're all happy to discuss it with you.
Thank you, Deputy O'Caoláin. Deputy O'Leary, please.
Yeah, I suppose just a few things. Firstly, I agree, the online sphere is massive, growing, and I think quite insidious in some respects in terms of the impact it has. But having said that, it is a particular type of addiction. There is a particular, there are people who get addicted to slot machines. They might be addicted to gambling in other respects. It is a thing that happens. And I think we need to be conscious of that. I suppose just to ask the Minister, he didn't quite respond just in terms of that point I was making in terms of the lines. I don't know if he can respond, but if not, if he can have a look over it over the summer, because, if that is the case, I can't be certain that it is. I think that, makes a significant difference to the decisions we make here. But the other question I'd ask is, there is, as I understand it, a difference between slot machines and what are called fixed odd betting tournaments, which usually consist of things like roulette and blackjack and other things like that. They are considered to be even more addictive. I read a story of somebody in Britain who lost, I think, $6,000 in 60 minutes or something like that on these machines. I think they're banning them maybe in Britain, I think possibly. So I suppose just to ask, as I understand it, these weren't legal in this jurisdiction before. Am I right in saying that remains the case? So if you could just put that on the record if you can.
Minister, will you be embarking on an investigative visit to a number of establishments over the summer?
We might go together,
to catch up on Deputy O'Leary.
We might go together, Chairman.
You have the floor, and Tarl.
Okay, some attempts have been made in the media again, and again, we talk about the situation in the UK, and there's a certain category of machines there called, they're colloquially called fixed odd betting terminals, FOBTs. Now, in the UK, 4 of these machines were allowed per shop, which led to a huge increase in pop-up bookmakers. And the UK government has now reduced the maximum stake for the 4 Category B gaming machines to £2. There were no changes to maximum prize amounts, which I'm told range from £400 to £500. That's the FOBTs. Studies and Deputy O'Leary is absolutely correct here, in the UK have suggested that such FOBT machines are highly addictive in nature and can lead to issues of serious problem gambling. But to be clear, such machines have never been a feature in bookmaker shops in Ireland. And as I have already said, gaming machines here are only allowed in licensed gaming arcades. And again, we must ensure, getting back what Deputy Fitzpatrick said earlier on, we must ensure that our enforcement measures in this regard are robust. And again, I would encourage Revenue and the Gardaí to be extra vigilant in this regard in removing machines from unlicensed locations. And the gaming machines have been available in licensed gaming arcades in the States since the 56 Act was commenced. The 2014-2015 survey on gambling prevalence results published in February of this year by the Department of Health showed that the most prevalent forms of gambling engaged by persons were those associated with the National Lottery, believe it or not. And and again, on the issue of unlicensed machines and premises, I would hope that the district courts, and they do their own business in dealing with applications for certificates under Part 3 of the Act, would be satisfied that such local authority resolutions are in place before issuing such certificates. So that's basically what I have to say. I'm not an expert on the lines and so on, but I understand it can be per spin, but certainly we'll do some research and we'll get back to the Deputy on that.
Just on a yes or no, FOBTs won't be legal after this legislation?
No.
They're not legal and they won't be?
No, we don't want them here at all, no.
Okay, thanks.
Take very little change with you, Minister. The amendment is withdrawn, Deputy O'Caoláin?
Yeah, and I might put it down as report stage.
Report stage. And the same applies to amendment number 4, both in section 5.
Correct.
Caoimhghín. In that case, there are no amendments remaining in section 5, and I therefore put the question that section 5 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Caoimhghín, we move on to section 6. The following sections have no amendments, and I intend to go through them without referencing that fact repeatedly. That Section 6 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That Section 7 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That Section 8 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That Section 9 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That Section 10 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That Section 11 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Thank you. We're on to Section 12, where there are 4 amendments. There are 2 different groupings here, 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. We're taking 5 and 6 together. Number 5 is in the name of Deputy O'Leary. Number 6 in the name of Deputy O'Caoláin. Now, 6 is a logical alternative to 5, and so I invite Deputy O'Leary to address both amendments, please.
Okay, very well. Now, they're not grouped together, but they are very closely connected to 7 and 8, so I think it would be necessary just to reference that. This relates to, sorry, just I have the right line here now, yeah. I suppose the amendment arises out of being contacted by the Bingo Association, and they're involved in running bingos on behalf of, sorry, I'm the right one. Yeah, these are, I suppose their concern is that the situation in relation to bingos wasn't properly anticipated or wasn't considered adequately. Some of these organisations are commercial and they run bingos often on behalf of charitable organisations, right? Their concern is, right, that they're not covered in terms of, because they won't be the licensee, they would be an agent of the licensee, that they wouldn't be covered and they wouldn't be in a position to run the bingo on behalf of whatever the licensee is. So they feel that they're not covered by that and they're legitimately concerned by that. The other relates to 7 is the fact that whatever way the dynamic of a bingo works, if they're, as the legislation is drafted currently, 50% is the maximum for prizes. Generally, their view is, I wouldn't be an expert, that for a bingo competition to be attractive, it needs to be in the range of 60 to 70% prize. That otherwise you won't get people in the door adequately unless the prize pot is 60 to 70, because that's, I don't know, what people expect or whatever. And now there's a difference between mine and Jim's. My understanding is that the 40%, as in mine, that what the expenses of promotion, etc., would include what payments would be made to the charitable organisation that the licensee would be acting on behalf of. Now, maybe the wording requires work to clarify that, but...
Can I just clarify, Deputy, we're not dealing with 7 and 8 at this point.
I know it's very salient, though, because I think they probably would have been better grouped together because it's all related to the same issue, you know.
All right, proceed so.
Anyway, look, I'm more or less finished, but I just think that there is a point there that the expectation of the patrons is that the prize fund is between 60 to 70%. So I don't know if that can be addressed. Anyway, those are the amendments.
Deputy O'Leary. Deputy O'Caoláin, would you like to pick up on your amendment?
Yeah, well, they're very similar to Donncha's, if not identical, except for my amendment in number 8. I suppose the purpose of it, as Donncha says, is that there are people who run bingos for charities. And for instance, say a GA club wants to run a bingo night, like you need a certain amount of equipment and technology to run it. And these people will come in, they'll run the bingo night for them. And their concern is that under this legislation, as we're proposing to amend Section 28, that they will be precluded from getting a licence for the purpose of running this lottery. And I suppose our first amendment is to subsection 8. So subsection 8 says a person who holds a lottery licence shall not transfer that licence to any other person, and any such purported transfer shall be void and of no effect. And what we were going to put in is save where a licensee utilises an agent to conduct a lottery on its behalf. So obviously if you apply to the district court for a lottery licence, you're a charity, you apply for it, you can't then transfer it on to somebody else under this legislation. And they feel that's going to change the position that operates at present, because at present they can be delegated by the applicant to run the lottery on their behalf. So I'd just be interested to hear what the Minister has to say in respect of it. Just that, since we're talking about 7 and 8 as well, like the amendment I've put down there is that in the case of the lottery conducted by an agent of the licensee, which is what we're discussing here, I've down that no more than 25% of the gross proceeds shall be utilised for the expenses of promotion, including commission. Obviously, the legislation can and should try to specify, place a limit on how much money collected can be used for the profits of the of an agent who's running this type of operation. The real objective is you want to try to ensure that most of the money is going to go to the philanthropic and charitable purpose. But wait to hear what the Minister has to say in respect of it.
Okay, well, we'll move to the Minister at this point, and if there are further contributors, we'll take them afterwards.
So, thank you, Chairman, and thanks, colleagues. Just to be clear, I think I'm dealing with Amendment 5 and
We're
6.
dealing with 5 and 6, but reference has also been made to 7 and 8, although they're not grouped. You're welcome to reference that or to deal with them separately as was structured in the grouping list.
Okay. Right. I'll start off with Amendment 5 and 6, and as you say, Chairman, they are related. They concern Section 12 of the Bill, which substitutes Section 28 of the 56 Act with a new section that sets out the application process for a lottery licensed by the District Court. The section maintains the current maximum prize amount of €30,000. The section, however, makes provision for a prize fund limit of €360,000, where a once-off annual lottery is promoted under a District Court licence. Now, the District Court grants a licence to an applicant where the applicant fulfils the conditions laid down in the new Section 28 of the Bill. There are significant, and I say significant, additional conditions for the prospective licensee to meet. I would contend that these are necessary and legitimate requirements to ensure the best promotion of the lottery, to guard against fraudulent behaviour and to prevent potential criminal behaviour, including money laundering. Any lottery licensee may appoint an agent or agents to help promote a lottery. This is permitted by the current law and confirmed by court judgment. However, this does not mean that the licensee can abandon responsibility or control of the lottery to an agent. This would undermine the policy and legislative intention in modernising the provisions on the better promotion of lotteries. Both Deputy O'Callaghan's and Deputy O'Leary's amendments will have the effect of allowing the transfer of a lottery licence issued to an applicant by the District Court to an agent to conduct that lottery. No checks or controls on such an agent as are imposed on the licensee are proposed in the amendment. There are inherent dangers associated with such an approach. The proposed amendments would appear to arise from representations from some associations who purport to run commercial bingo by acting as agents of lottery licensees. I've received the representations as well. In my view, despite any assertions to the contrary, no pathway was provided in the 1956 Act for commercial bingo as a profit-driven business for agents or operators acting as for licensees. I'm not proposing to accept the amendments along the lines proposed for the reasons that I've outlined.
Thank you. And Tara, now I just go back to the proposers, Deputy Brophy, just first to see if they wish to take up. Deputy O'Leary, did you want to respond to the Minister's reply?
No, let Deputy Brophy in first.
Deputy O'Callaghan, you okay?
Well, the Minister seems to be making the point that if our amendments are allowed, that it would mean that the person to whom, an agent to whom the licence is transferred, wouldn't have to go through the vigorous process that's set out before the District Court. I suppose, yeah, under the way we have drafted subsection 8, it obviously clearly implies that there would be permission to transfer the licence from the applicant to the agent, and the agent would then conduct the lottery on its behalf. But are you saying, Minister, that as things stand at present, that even if you aren't the holder of the licence, you can still promote the lottery if you're an agent?
The current situation is, yes, an agent can be appointed. But obviously, from what I've read out here, there are inherent dangers and risks around that. So the amendment as written here would actually allow the licensee, the transfer of the licence to an agent who hadn't been through the checks and balances of the court.
Yeah.
So Deputy O'Callaghan gets the licence and he transfers it to Deputy Chambers, who may or may not be of good character.
Yeah.
And we find and that he operates the lottery then. So the court then has no way of checking as to what's going on here. So this is why we have these safeguards in here, and they're very serious safeguards. You know. So if somebody applies as a licensee, they can apply an agent to help to run it, but transferring the licence is a completely different matter.
And you say they don't need to transfer the licence if they want to get these people in to help them. They can enter into an arrangement with those people.
Correct.
To pay them themselves for running the licence, but they don't have to have them as applying for the licence. Okay.
Okay, Deputy Colm Brophy, please.
Really, that was at the heart of the point I want to make. As I understood the way the amendments were phrased, it effectively put a straight end run around the whole licensing process. Because not that you could see somebody doing this, but you could have an organisation or entity which would fulfil the criteria for getting a licence, then being able to transfer it to somebody for which there was no vetting or regulation of at all, which would almost nullify the process if people wanted to use it in a particular way. So that's my reservation on those amendments. I think that if there is the opportunity for an organisation to engage in a commercial arrangement with someone, to engage in aspects of fulfilling the licence they've been granted, that meets surely the criteria of what people are looking for in this area who would be legitimately wanting to operate it. But I would have grave reservations about the amendments.
Okay, Deputy Jack Chambers, please.
Yeah, like I suppose if you were to, like you make very valid points about obviously creating a potential agent that is unknown to the courts process system. What if you were to say a named agent? So you have a licensee, but you have a named agent as part of that licence, which would be transparent and clear, rather than giving a kind of unlimited control to the licensee to have a potential agent. But if you were to actually incorporate a named agent to the court's awarding of a licence, it might be a... I don't know, I'm just thinking... but thanks, Minister.
Okay, hold it, Minister. We'll take them together. Deputy O'Leary coming back in.
I'm understanding the Minister right, so are you saying that this isn't necessary, that after this legislation is passed, whatever about the situation now, but after this legislation is passed, that it will be possible, without an amendment of this kind, for a bingo hall to run a bingo on behalf of a charitable purpose? Will that continue to be possible?
Okay, if you take all of those, Minister, please.
Yeah, the answer to the last question is that's the current law as confirmed by the courts. So, I mean,
yes, but that wasn't the question. The question was, what will be the situation after this legislation?
It won't change.
That won't change.
Won't change.
Okay.
No.
All right.
And on the other issue with respect to Deputy Chambers' question, the amendments actually serve to transfer the licence to someone else who's not named and unknown. But if the person is party to the licence initially, the court, for instance, I mean, a person may apply to the district court for a licence, authorising the person to promote a periodic licence in accordance with this Act. I mean, that's a different matter, you know.
Please,
would that preclude an agent applying, Minister? Say your new section 28(1) was changed to a person or their agent may apply to the district court for a licence. Like, I'm just trying to think, are you saying that the charity itself must apply for the licence? Because obviously if you're looking at subsection 3, you're going to look at the character of the applicant.
Yeah, it is for charity or philanthropic purposes, you're correct. Okay. Otherwise it's for professional, and that's not the intention.
Okay.
But if somebody applies as a licensee for a charity or charitable purposes, then that's, and you know, they can do that, and they can get an agent to help them and support them.
Okay, yeah.
But they can transfer the licence to the agent.
Yeah, okay. Listen, in light of what the Minister said, I'm not going to push my amendment, although I may, at the report stage, put in an amendment sort of giving the entitlement to a person or their agent to make the application. So then at least the District Court would be able to vet the agent.
Thank you, Deputy Caoláin. Deputy Fitzpatrick.
Minister, you mentioned about the person holding the licence not being able to transfer it to a person that's not vetted. Can I ask you, the person with the licence, initially, are they vetted initially to be sure that the people who has the licence is actually capable of holding a licence before we can even transfer or pass license down to the person that has no qualifications.
Deputy's attention, Chairman, to Section 3 of the bill. In considering an application under this section for a lottery licence, the judge of the court, district court, with regard to the following: the character of the applicant, the number of periodical lotteries already in operation in the locality, the purpose of the lottery, and so on. So there are a whole load of conditions here that the court will take into account before they grant the licence.
Okay, thank you for that. So back again then to Deputy O'Leary. We're dealing with amendments 5 and 6 just specifically at this point. Where stands amendment number 5, Deputy O'Leary?
Withdrawn, yeah, for the same reasons Deputy Collins, the State Appointed Minister, is making. So yeah, withdraw that. With a view to reintroducing her.
And Deputy O'Callaghan, you're withdrawing amendment 6?
I might come back to that report stage.
Very good, thank you. Moving on to amendments 7 and 8. They have both been addressed by each of the moving deputies. Is there any further comment that they may want to make, or the Minister in reply? Have you covered it?
It's been affected by the withdrawal of my amendment number 6, so I will withdraw amendment number 8 as well, because it doesn't make sense without amendment number 6 going in.
Deputy O'Leary?
Yeah, the same as that, except I would like if the Minister could just address, as I say, there is a view, accurate or not, I don't know, that bingo isn't attractive unless the prize fund is between 60 to 70%, and it's capped at 50%, and that's roughly where the prize funds are at currently. So I don't know, is that a matter that was considered by the department? Otherwise, I'm withdrawing it because, as I say, it doesn't fit.
I'll hear your reply,
yeah,
please.
okay.
Thank you,
the amendments are similar. I mean, are familiar to me because I've had representations as well on these. The Deputy O'Callaghan's amendment is one that I could agree with up to a point. In fact, but my bill also fixes the proportion of allowable expenses at maximum 25%, down from 40% in the 56 Act of the total proceeds. Critically, my bill also provides for the first time the amount of the total proceeds that must be allocated to prizes, a maximum of 50%, and to the charitable or philanthropic cause, a maximum of 25%. Deputy O'Leary's amendment number 7 is to the effect of restoring the 40% expenses provision for agents. No guaranteed amount for the good cause that the lottery was licensed for or intended to benefit is provided for on either of the Deputy's proposed amendments. So I think that what we're proposing is probably more positive in that regard. In all stages of the debates on the bill so far, no one has opposed this modernisation of the lottery licence application and issue process, but it's useful to discuss it. The grant by the court of a lottery licence is a significant matter. It is not something that is insignificant, as I say. The effect of the Deputy's amendments would effectively hand over lottery licences to agents who would not have to bother going through the licence application of the court, as we said. And then the proposition, as in the Deputy's respective second amendments, that would only guarantee an agent a fixed proportion of the total lottery proceeds, while not giving any mandated return to the charitable or philanthropic organisation cause involved out of the prize fund. So the impact there is that we're focusing on the takings of an agent, and we should really be focusing on the good cause that needs the funds. So this is why I feel that the amendments are not actually balanced, if you will. Because what we're doing here in the bill itself is we're guaranteeing, for the first time, as I said, a maximum of 50% to prizes, and 25% must be given to the charity. So, so that's actually in the legislation. So again, I hope that's of help.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Leary, where stands your amendment number 7?
As I say, I'm not pressing it, but no, I don't. The question, there was a specific question there, if you can address it at all.
I have no way of actually responding to that. I have no research or evidence as to whether or not you have to have a large payout. But we are giving here 50%, which I would contend is quite substantial.
Yeah, okay.
Because, I mean, in the past, the agent got 40%, right, and then there was only 60% left. And if you break that down, you expect that the charity would get a fair amount of that. So what we are actually doing here is we're reducing the amount the agent or the promoter is getting, if you will, the expense amount for the thing, and we are increasing the amount we're ensuring that the charity gets a maximum amount of 25%. The rest then must go to prizes, which means that what the deputy is talking about in that the prices have to be at a certain level, if I understand it correctly, in order to attract people to go in and play in the first place. If that's what the deputy is saying, then 50% is what is the maximum amount that can be allocated.
Okay. Well, look, just if the Minister can examine that again over the summer.
Pardon?
If you can examine it over the summer, just the issue that's been raised.
Okay.
Deputy Brophy.
We're busy summer.
Just to say, in relation to what Deputy Leary is looking at, I just have a major reservation on this, because if you take the idea that 70–80% should go in prizes, and is that what they're saying, that about 70% go, that 70% go in prizes, and there's an operator cost built into it as well. The actual core legality of the existence of why it exists in the first place, which is that it's beneficial to the organisation that has the licence to run it, is almost zero. So you're actually saying, as good as it might be for the people playing it, but you're actually saying that in reality, by the time we give out the prizes and by the time we take our cut for running it, what's going to be handed back to the charity has to be, on those type of figures, virtually zero, or 5%. And that would, to my mind, question the whole underlying basis under which a licence could be issued if the beneficiary was getting so little. And I think even people playing the game, if they thought they were going in and playing in a game which had at it, operated in support of X or Y, and that the X or Y at the end of all of this got 5%, I think we'd be going down a very dangerous road.
Okay, Deputy
I
O'Callaghan.
don't think that's a correct characterisation of the amendment that I'd put down, but since I've withdrawn it, I don't think it's necessary to have the debate.
No, I was sorry. I was specifically responding to 70%, not yours, Jim.
Okay, beg your pardon. I withdraw my comments there, as well as my amendment.
I'm noting these withdrawals, and we're going to move on.
Okay.
All the amendments, therefore, in section 12 have been withdrawn. And I'm going to put the proposition that section 12 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. Now, I intend just to call the sections. There are no amendments over the next series of sections up to section 24. So I'm going to just put the propositions repeatedly through. That section 13 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 14 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 15 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 16 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 17 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 18 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Is that section 19 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 20 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 21 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 22 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 23 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 24 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? That section 25 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Thank you for your cooperation with that. We're on to section 26, amendments numbers 9 and 10 in the names of Deputies O'Leary and O'Callaghan respectively. They will be taken together. 10 is a logical alternative to 9, and I invite Deputy O'Leary to address his amendment number 9. Please.
Thanks very much. Chair, I suppose the National Lottery is a body that feeds hundreds of thousands of euro back into communities every week and millions upon millions every year. In most countries, the National Lottery is the only lottery, I suppose not the only lottery, but betting on the outcome of the National Lottery is not allowed. There are a number of particularly online avenues now for speculating and betting on the outcome of the National Lottery. I suppose that's money that potentially could be going to the National Lottery. Their own sense of it, the National Lottery, is that could make the difference of €110 million a year to the fund alone, to the Good Causes Fund, that can benefit community organisations, sporting clubs, charitable organisations on the ground. So this is something that is commonplace in Europe, in other jurisdictions and around the world. Ireland is unusual, as I understand it, for the lack of regulation in this area. So look, I mean, I would like to see us, work towards some form of a consensus in this area, but I do think it's an issue that needs to be explored. I'd be interested in the Minister's view on it, but it is a very significant amount of money that could benefit charitable purposes that currently doesn't.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy O'Callaghan, please.
I introduced last year a bill entitled the National Lottery Protection of Central Fund Bill, and the purpose of it was to try to protect the Central Fund, in particular trying to protect it from offshore online speculators who are running, I suppose, bets on the outcome of the National Lottery. They're perfectly, I suppose, entitled to do it, but the reason why it's of public concern is because when you buy a lottery ticket, part of it's going to go to the Central Fund, which is for the benefit of the public, and we all know good projects in the area that protect it. But if we have a drift from people buying national lottery tickets to instead purchase or betting on the lottery online, well, then they don't contribute to the Central Fund, and that was the purpose of the legislation. I know the Minister dealt with this a bit in the Shannon, so I listened to what he has to say. There's a slight difference between Donnacha's amendment and mine. I've redefined the outcome of a lottery game so as to not catch those people who aren't offshore online operators. But anyway, like all of these amendments, there are a lot of people affected by it, or who present themselves as being affected by it. So I'd be interested to hear what the Minister has to say.
Thank you for that. Before I invite the Minister, would Deputy Sheriff like to speak at this point?
I just, if I may, just seek clarification from the proposers of both amendments, just to ask, would the effect of the amendment be such that if my neighbour who is of pensionable age, who likes the odd flutter, maybe on a Saturday night, who might purchase a lottery ticket, but also likes to go to the bookies and bet on maybe 2 numbers or 3 numbers, that the effect of this amendment now would prevent my neighbour from actually having that little flutter? Is that essentially the effect of both amendments?
I don't think it's the effect of my amendment, because I put in a change. You see, I've redefined the outcome of a lottery game is defined as the complete amount of numbers drawn, in respect of which the top prize is awarded. So unless she was betting on the 6 numbers.
Deputy O'Leary, would you like to respond to Deputy Sherlock's question?
Yes. Yeah.
The answer is yes?
Okay.
Fine.
So the bookies, in effect, would no longer be allowed to take bets on the outcome of lottery numbers. Thank you.
Deputy Chambers, please.
Yeah, this is kind of related to it, but obviously the National Lottery is now controlled by its ownership is concentrated by a Canadian pension fund, and I'd like to ask the Minister if he would accept an amendment at report stage to ring-fence the unclaimed prizes which are presently used for marketing purposes to go back towards public or charitable projects, if he'd agree to amending the present scenario, because whilst obviously some of these amendments relate to the National Lottery wanting to stave off competition from other operators, and that's what this is about. I'm not that bothered by that, but I am bothered by the fact that the National Lottery presently uses unclaimed prizes to promote itself, rather than them going back to their particular purpose, which is for charities or for proper projects. And I think it's a public issue around the present drafting of the Act, and I'd like the Minister, or would the Minister be open to changing it so that any unclaimed prizes would have to be returned, would have to be pooled towards charitable projects, or would go back to the state, rather than being used by the present private pension fund to promote its own activity. And I think there's huge public concern about that, that huge amounts of money are being kept by the lottery operator and not going to the particular purpose. So it's just a separate argument, but it relates to lotteries, Chair.
Deputy Fitzpatrick.
My main concern is there's an awful lot of jobs involved here. If you look at the Irish betting shops at the moment, like the Minister of Finance has doubled the taxes. They're paying their taxes. They're creating a lot of jobs, especially all around the rural area, all around the country at the moment. They've been doing the national lotto. They've been doing these lottos for the last 25 years. To me, it's completely different what they have at the national lottery. Are we going to start excluding competition here at the moment? Is like I come from a business background, and competition is good there at the moment. So I just think it's two completely different things at the moment. And I definitely can't support Donnghaille's amendments there at the moment. And I think, Minister, I said earlier on, we do worry about addictions and everything else at the moment, but at the same time too, we have to be very careful here. Like the amount of jobs that this involves is very, very serious.
Okay, a combination of elements to these this grouping of amendments, Minister. 9 and 10 together, please.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, colleagues, for the comments and the questions. This matter appears to be raised in almost the same terms by both of the amendments. And again, as has been said, this was discussed extensively in the Shannon. And again, I note that the amendments are the same as the text of a bill submitted by the National Lottery, my department, in 2018. And I think it's similar to a bill that was prepared by Deputy Ó Caoláin around the same time. Now, we spoke to the Attorney General on this, and they are in agreement with the position that I set out in some detail in the other House. There is an issue that in accepting this amendment, it might lead to further demands from the National Lottery, perhaps seeking to prohibit the local lotteries that support our sports clubs and community organisations. There's a lot of those on there, and a lot of our sports clubs and community organisations depend on lotteries. You could argue that that's a direct competition with the National Lottery. A similar argument to that made by the deputies could also be made that they also impact, as I say, on the turnover of the National Lottery. Football, rugby, hurling, tidy towns and so on. It could be argued they have an impact on the sales. So I don't think any of us could agree that on kind of doing anything to curtail that kind of activity, which benefits directly local sports clubs and other organisations. Now, again, it has been mentioned by Deputy Chambers that the National Lottery is a private company now, and the essence seems to be to enhance their position as a private company by seeking to end the possibility for licensed bookmakers, both land-based and remote, to offer bets on the outcome of the Irish National Lottery draws as they might on any other probability outcomes. And the point was made by Deputy Fitzpatrick on that as well. The Deputy's proposals would allow, however, licensed land-based or online bookmakers to offer bets on any other lottery, just not the Irish one. So that's just the thing. Should the Deputy's proposition be accepted, I can foresee certain legal uncertainty and potential challenges from licensed bookmakers. And I don't think actually it would achieve what's intended, which is possibly increased sales for the National Lottery. Just for information, Chairman, the turnover of the National Lottery has increased in 2015 to 670 million, 2016 750 million, 2017 800 million, 2018 805 million. That's a 20% increase in 4 years. And this certainly doesn't suggest much impact arising from the licensing or of bet on lottery operators since 2015. The contribution of the National Lottery to good causes has increased each year. This is to be welcomed, although such contribution is surely the critical situation of having a National Lottery in the first place. So the turnover is going up every year, and there's no convincing evidence that betting on lottery numbers is undermining funding for good causes currently, or that it threatens the profitability of the National Lottery operator in the long term. And as I said, it's now a private company. Neither is there evidence that I'm aware of that betting on lottery numbers leads to a loss of revenue to the Exchequer. Licensed remote bookmakers offering bets on lottery numbers and all licensed Irish betting shops must pay tax on every bet they take. They must pay the current necessary licence fee. Bookmaker shops also contribute to the Exchequer by, as has been said, providing many jobs in towns and villages all over the country. The product offered in betting shops or online is a bet, not a ticket sale. Irish bookmakers, I understand, offer bets on 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 numbers being drawn. In terms of cost to customers, bookmakers accept bets of 5 cents and upwards, whereas the National Lottery minimum stake is €5 for 2 lines without the plus option. Online operators, I understand, normally offer bets on the outcome of the National Lottery, Euro Millions Lottery and other lotteries, with players having to choose the corresponding numbers relating to those draws. And I am also not aware of, nor have been provided with any advice to suggest that the outcome of the weekly National Lottery draws are exempt from being bet on. Such is the position with football matches or races. I may bet on their outcome without hindrance by the organisers of the event. And again, I am aware of no argument to suggest that the National Lottery numbers are afforded some special form of legal or intellectual property protection. Certainly in any representations I have received in this matter, the National Lottery operator has advanced no such arguments. And as I said in the Shannon, another point, I have no function in respect of the National Lottery as such in its regulation or licensing. That is a matter for the Minister under the National Lottery Act 2013. That's the Minister for Finance and Public Expenditure. My department's role concerning licensed bookmakers under the Betting Act is limited to the provision of certificates of fitness for applicants for bookmakers' licences, remote bookmakers' licences and for remote betting intermediaries. The Revenue Commissioners issue licences after that. I note that the Minister for Public Expenditure Reform did not provide in the National Lottery Act for any prohibition on licensed bookmakers offering bets on the outcome of the National Lottery draw on Wednesdays and Saturdays, nor did the Minister for Finance address this point during the preparation of the Betting Amendment Act 2015. To the best of my knowledge, there are no conditions or prohibitions imposed in the Betting Acts 1931 to 2015 as to the nature and extent of the bets that licensed bookmakers, land-based or remote, might offer. I'm sorry that it's going on a bit here, but I feel that we must ventilate this. And Deputy Chambers, I think, asked about unclaimed winnings. Again, I agree with the sentiment that the Deputy has made there, but again, it's a matter for the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform to deal with that. It's not kind of taken up here, but I certainly agree with the sentiment behind the words the Deputy used there to talk about this. Yeah.
Tara, back to the proposers. Deputy O'Leary, Deputy O'Callaghan, how would you like to respond to the Minister's reply to your proposals?
Just a few points, I suppose. Firstly, I take the point that it's a private company. I don't think that should have happened. I think, well, I know, but can't pretend that there wasn't parties in here that supported it, and there was parties in here who opposed that. So I think that was a bad decision. But it's also the fact that it can't be treated as any other private company because there's a good causes fund there that the public benefits from, and it's in the public interest that remains at a high level. And it's also in the public interest that, at some stage this licence will be renewed with some other company potentially. And in the meantime, you want the money coming out of it to be healthy, and you want as many clubs as possible to benefit from it. I think that's a reasonable public objective. I wouldn't have chosen a private company route for it, but there you are. That's the situation as things stand. I've listened to what the Minister said, and I suppose some of it is technical, but in terms of the principal point, it is the case that increasingly, especially the online element of it, there is an awful lot of people who are using some of these online companies to bet on the lotto. And there's other elements to it as well in terms of the bookies and all the rest of it, but it's how you actually manage to catch the first is the difficulty in drafting the thing as a whole. I think that there is a very substantial sum that is potentially being lost out on. My understanding is, and maybe the Minister can clarify this, most European jurisdictions protect their national lottery and the funds that come from it. I don't know if he can offer a comment on that. And as I say, perhaps things might be healthy now, but if the drift continues in the direction of commercially operated lotteries with no public benefit, then the national lottery is undermined. And I take the point, obviously, there's Bride Rovers Lotto or, Terran Euro Tidy Towns Lotto. Nobody wants to go near them, and that's not proposed in this amendment. Well, it's not proposed in this amendment. The Minister can speculate about what might happen in the future, but it's not anticipated in this amendment, and this amendment won't do that. So.
Okay, Deputy O'Callaghan, please.
Although it is a private company, I think the reason why we've put down the amendment is because there's a central fund there that's established in legislation. The National Lottery itself is established by legislation. So it's different to any sort of private enterprise. There's monies there for the benefit of the public. Like, I'm conscious from what like Sean Sherlock has said about people betting on a couple of numbers, that maybe the amendment as drafted may go a bit further than that, and that's why I tried to limit it a bit so it wouldn't cover situations like that. It's complicated. My inclination is, like, we've had a fairly consensual meeting here. I might come back to it at report stage, rather than push it here now. Don't know if I'd necessarily win it anyway. But I do think the government should look to see what it can do to protect the central fund. The Minister would give statistics now indicating that the lottery is doing very well, but we know from other jurisdictions that it can be undermined by these offshore, very effective operators. And we just need to ensure that we don't permit that to happen. And like, if it happens, it's too late then to start introducing legislative measures to try to protect the lottery, because the harm will have been done. And I think the Minister should give greater recognition to the need to protect the central fund.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. Deputy Sean Sherlock, please.
Yeah, no, just very briefly, I'm just wondering if before report stage the Minister might be in a position to, if it is within his means, to come back to us with some statistics around, what the opportunity cost foregone is as a result of the existence of the facility to be able to bet on the lotto numbers in a bookies. Because I imagine, Chair, that that would be quite a difficult task and possibly insurmountable. I don't know, because you would then have to go into every single bookie shop in the country and seek to measure what the revenue is arising from bets on the numbers on the lotto on a Wednesday and a Saturday night, and I'm not sure how feasible that is. But look, the Minister might have a response to that request nonetheless.
Thank you, Deputy Sherlock. Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick, please.
In fairness to the Minister has already given us some statistics. He stated that in 2015 I was 670 million. All of a sudden, in 2018, it's 802 million. Like, that's 132 million of increase in just a short period of time. It's great. Like, but we can't forget this. These Irish betting shops has been doing this lottery for the last 25 years. An awful lot of people dependent on jobs, and I just think, are we actually thinking what we're actually doing? And it's only a matter of time. Next we'll be chasing the GA clubs and the title turns. It's always saying that this won't happen, but that's where things go. All of a sudden, the National Lottery will be coming along and saying, "All right, let's get rid of the betting shops, let it get rid of the internet." Then the next thing we're saying, "Oh, sure, all these charges institutes." I think it's wrong. I think it's going on. I think these bookie shops or betting shops is like they're paying their taxes. Like, the tax was increased by 100% there recently, and I think we all seem to be anti-betting shops there at the moment. And I just think that, especially coming from my county of County Louth, the amount of people that's involved in that industrial, I just think it'd be a bad influence coming from here.
Thank you, Deputy Fitzpatrick. Deputy Brophy, please.
It's just a small point. I don't see the logic of the thing at all, because from what I don't gamble at all, so maybe I don't understand the mentality behind it. But surely, if somebody wants to have a bet on the outcome of a randomly generated 6 numbers, their convenience point is they're choosing the Irish Lotto numbers at the moment. If we say you can't do that on the Lotto, their most likely next course of action is to bet on the randomly generated 6 numbers for, say, the UK Lotto. It's not to actually change over and decide, I'm going to leave now, I'm going to go down and buy a lottery ticket.
Minister has stated.
And I think, therefore, I can't see why we're even doing this, to be honest. I can't see the purpose of the amendments, because I just don't see what they will achieve at all. And I don't even think, by the way, they'll achieve anything in terms of either protecting the fund if they were passed or helping the Lotto's profitability, because I think if you do this, it's such a marginal thing that they'll just switch over to betting on something different. 6 numbers is 6 numbers,
Thank you. Deputy Chambers, please.
Yeah, I agree with Donnghaile around the sale of the National Lottery was a mistake, and the fact that it's owned by Canadian pension fund demonstrates the difficulty here. But my issue isn't with what has been specifically submitted in these amendments. As I mentioned, Minister, 16 million was inherited by this private operator from An Post. which was meant to go into the public fund for charitable causes. It's being used by these private operators to promote themselves. They're also using unclaimed prizes to promote themselves. I have no sympathy with and I take your point around turnover. I don't have huge sympathy with either of the amendments. My question is, would you accept an amendment to mandate the operator to ring-fence unclaimed prizes for public causes? Because the regulator isn't dealing with it, the Minister for Public Expenditure isn't dealing with it, and this might be an opportunity to deal with it, because it seems nobody is willing to actually provide better oversight. I think that there's millions of euro at stake here which could be put to good causes, which is being hoovered up by the operator because of the ambiguity of our present legislative position. And I'm mentioning it now at committee stage because I think we need to deal with it. The fact that they inherited 16 million of public money and they're able to and they're able to use it to promote themselves is shocking, and I think this is a good opportunity to deal with it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chambers. Minister, back to you, and you have a compendium of positions there to deal with.
On the final point there made by Deputy Chambers, as I said earlier, I certainly have a lot of sympathy for the points made, and I would communicate those to the Minister for Finance and Public Expenditure. The National Lottery is under his remit, so I'm slow to kind of stand on those toes at this stage. I don't think I'd be able to. So, but certainly I'll bring the Deputy's points to the attention of the Minister and ask him to consider that in his overall view. I don't think this is the intention here of that. It's getting away from what we're doing here in many ways, which is to do with gambling rather than the unclaimed prizes in the National Lottery. But I certainly will talk to the Minister of Finance on that. On the issue, I just want to make the point that the 2014-15 survey of gambling prevalence, as I said earlier, which was published in February of this year by the Department of Health, showed that the most prevalent forms of gambling engaged in by persons were those with games associated with the National Lottery. And they have quite an aggressive advertising campaign ongoing all the time. And I would have certain issues with some of the stuff that's being portrayed, winning islands and all this kind of stuff, which is glamorising it in my view. The turnover, as I said, has gone up every year. And even though the betting on the numbers is occurring, it's having no impact whatsoever on the turnover. In fact, it's going the other way. And I'm taken with what Deputy Sherlock said. The impact of these particular amendments would be to prevent somebody having a flutter on the numbers on a Saturday night or a Wednesday if they want to. So the citizen out there who wants to have a small bet on the outcome, we're saying you can't do that anymore. That's what we're actually saying if these amendments go through. And we're curtailing that freedom, and they will just move somewhere else. So I don't think at the end of the day that it's going to have the desired impact at all, except by taking away the freedom from our own citizens that they have already to go and have as Deputy Sherlock said, I think he called it a flutter, a small flutter. So if we do that, this is the impact. They are the people who are going to actually be impacted. National Lottery won't. When you look at the turnover they have, it's not going to make any difference one way or the other. And there's no guarantee that the person who's betting at the moment on the National Lottery numbers won't actually turn around and say, I'll bet on something else instead, and they'll flutter on something else. So it won't impact here one way or the other.
Okay.
That's my view.
Back to Deputy Chambers, fair enough.
I will be drafting an amendment, Minister, to submit it. I think it has received the widespread support of the House. It's an abuse of the licence by the present private operator. I think we all agree that the unclaimed prizes is a loophole that they're exploiting, and I intend to draft an amendment to deal with the issue. I think it falls within the general remit of the miscellaneous bill. It's such a broad encompassing draft that we can include it. And I think it's time we dealt with it, because I said I don't have any sympathy for the pensioners in Canada and what they're getting out of the Irish lottery system. So I think we need to narrow the squeeze in terms of the interpretation they have and what they're retaining in unclaimed prizes.
Either of the movers, Deputy O'Leary, to ask you first, how stands amendment number 9? Of course.
It seems to be unlikely that that it wouldn't benefit the National Lottery if something like this was to be the case, given the amount of sums that are involved in betting on this as things stand. primarily, as I said, through the online. And they're massive, like, Jesus, they're massive. There's any amount of companies now that are making big money out of betting on the Irish Lotto and various other lottos. In any event, I suppose I want to ask the Minister, I've asked the question before. My understanding is most European jurisdictions have legislation to protect their lottery. So, can you say if that's the case, and if it is, how do they do that?
Minister.
I mean, the choice we've taken is not to go down this route for the reasons I've outlined. And not every country has done that. Some countries have different reasons for doing different things. And I've outlined already the reasons why I feel that our citizens should be free to place bets, on small bets if they wish. The other point that I want to make, and I made it as well earlier on, is that all the licensed remote bookmakers and the bookmakers, or all licensed betting shops, must pay tax on every bet they take. So the exchequer is actually gaining from people putting bets on lottery numbers as well. So there's that element to it which we must bear in mind. So if you decide, they must pay the current necessary licence fee as well, and they can. And again, they have jobs in towns and villages all over Ireland, and I know that they are worried about those jobs if these amendments are pressed and passed.
Okay.
Deputy O'Caoláin.
Yeah, I won't push it. I may return to it at report stage.
Okay, there I go back to Deputy O'Leary in relation to Amendment 9.
Yeah, I'll withdraw it for the minute with a view to returning to the report stage. I do think this is an issue that needs to be examined carefully.
Very good. So amendments 9 and 10 have both been withdrawn. There are no other amendments in section 26. So therefore, I put the question that section 26 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed? Agreed. We move on to the final amendment. It's a new section, section 27. Amendment number 11, standalone. In the name of Deputy O'Leary, would you address your amendment, please?
I forgot I put this in. This is, I suppose, a very straightforward one. I raised the point at committee stage, or sorry, at second stage. We are limited in terms of our data in this jurisdiction. Some of the data that exists seems to be at odds with the data that exists in, neighbouring jurisdictions in the north and in Britain. So I think that we need a report like this. I think it's going to inform policy. It needs to be of very high quality. So that's the purpose of the amendment, and I'd like the Minister to seek such a report.
Minister, would you like to respond, please?
Yeah, the two amendments. One is that the Minister shall not later than 3 months after the commencement of this Act seek a report regarding the prevalence of gambling on an all-Ireland basis. And then also the second one then is about not later than 2 years cause a report to be prepared on the operation of the Act and should cause copies of it before the Oireachtas. On the first one, this was also debated in the channels, I'm sure deputies know. And it has to do with the prevalence of gambling in general rather than problem gambling solely. Again, I share with the Deputy and other members of this House deep concerns as to how we can best address the issues of harmful gambling which affects the lives of those persons addicted, their families and wider society. We're all on one on that. And I've always again placed our approach to this matter in a healthcare context for the attention of relevant qualified professionals. I think we've got to be careful that we don't actually, come to the view, or maybe let others think that if we set up a gambling regulator, that's going to assist problem gambling to a huge extent. Because somebody that has an addiction is a health issue, and I think we really have to focus on that side of it. A regulator will go so far, but if someone has an addiction, no amount of regulation is going to help. They need treatment. That's my contention. And again, I agree we must seek to better understand the issues involved and to obtain credible evidence of the nature and extent of the problems arising. And as has been said earlier by colleagues, gambling is complex, and it's increasingly taking place again in an online environment. Again, as I say, it's a matter for the Department of Health, and obviously it's not in my remit to carry out a report on gambling prevalence in Northern Ireland. Obviously, that goes. I think that should go without saying here. I must point out, however, that the drug prevalence survey for 2014-2015, which was published on the 27th of February 2019 by my colleague, the Minister for State for Health Promotion and the National Drug Strategy, Catherine Byrne. It contained the first set of data on the extent of gambling in Ireland North and South. The data is based on fieldwork carried out between August 2014 and August 2015. This general population survey of over 7,000 persons was a collaborative project between the National Advisory Committee on Drugs and Alcohol and colleagues in the Public Information and Health Research branch within the Department of Health in Northern Ireland. On this occasion, MRBI in Ireland carried out the fieldwork. My department contributed to the cost of that survey. The survey, and I accept that it is perhaps a little dated now, provides a baseline of data to assist in policy formulation and future planning and action on gambling. And the survey found that the prevalence of problem gambling in the general population was 0.8%. Problem gambling is most common in young males, 1.9% in males aged 18 to 24, 2.9% in males aged 25 to 34. The Health Research Board is now undertaking, Chairman, a 2018-2019 prevalence study, so it's actually happening as we speak. This will further assist in policy formulation, planning and action in this area. Results are expected in 2020. This survey will also contain a specific section on gambling prevalence with an extended range of questions, and again my department is contributing to the costs of that survey. While I welcome the concerns that motivates the proposed amendment, I believe that the Government is, through the large-scale professional work which is now underway by the HRB, is addressing those concerns, and I think we should await those results. So I don't see any point in duplicating it. The first part of the Deputy's proposal risks imposing a significant cost of the Exchequer, and as we're doing it already, I don't see any reason why we should do two of them. The second part seeks to impose a requirement to carry out a 2-year review of the operation of the Act. This period is one normally found in legislation. My department, in any event, will review the provisions of the amended Gaming and Lotteries Act as we work to bring forward proposals for the comprehensive reform of licensing and regulation of gambling in Ireland. So, again, I don't see any particular need to impose this review provision. I would hope that comprehensive legislative proposals for reform will be published within this period in any event. So we're doing the big work in tandem with this. So I would maybe ask the Deputy to consider withdrawing that, because this is only an interim measure. Whereby I want to have our resources actually focused, limited resources that we have, focused on getting the regulator established and getting the large piece of legislation drafted and enacted. And again, if we were to take resources away to do a review of this Act, and we're doing the other one at the same time, I think it would be maybe counterproductive. So maybe the Deputy, I can see the intention of it, but I think it's going to be happening anyway as we're doing the large piece of legislation.
Thank you. Tara's thought, Deputy O'Leary.
That's fair enough.
Okay. Yes, Deputy Chambers.
I think we have to be careful, Minister. Like, I've raised the issues around gambling addiction with Minister Byrne, and the Department of Health have zero interest in dealing with this issue. And you can keep deflecting from addiction around gambling, and your department can, but they have zero interest, and the HSE have zero interest in actually doing anything for anyone with a gambling addiction. If you talk to any frontline health professional, there is no support at all for people with an addiction when it comes to gambling. So obviously, as someone who's preparing to regulate the industry and to potentially levy the industry and to provide a social fund for the industry, I think you are obliged to front up on the healthcare aspects of this. And I think we're all fed up hearing about the old Whitehall model excuse of it's that department or it's this department, or, you know, and then we hear all the time, particularly in climate change, interdepartmental collaboration and cross-departmental engagement. Like, you should take the lead on the addiction issue, because the Department of Health have no interest, and they haven't implemented the Crystal Fulton recommendation around an gambling addiction strategy, and I don't believe the health system will provide for those with a gambling addiction in the short to medium term. So I think it's an opportunity for your department to actually do something, and maybe it's to develop a private pathway for those with a specific addiction. But I think you need to. It's just not good enough to keep deflecting to the Department of Health, because they're not going to do anything about it, and you know that as well as I do. And I just think we've got to flag that right now, because I know if any of us are here in years to come, nothing will have happened from the Department of Health on this. Absolutely zero. I know my colleagues Mick Wallace and Clare Daly, and I think I put in PQs in it, they don't even respond to them and have no interest. So we need to see more from your side, who are trying to do something about it. And I think, like, I personally support the amendments from Donnghaile, because if it does get your department to start fronting up, then maybe that'll be a good thing for the people in the future.
Thank you, Deputy Chambers. I'm taking others. Minister, you can respond collectively. Deputy Thomas Pringle, please.
Thanks, Chairman. Just in relation to this, I take on board what the Minister said in relation to the amendments, that there's work ongoing on the other bill, and that there's no need to actually go forward with these amendments because duplication of work and all that there. To take that, so I take it from that this provision will be included in the new bill. You're saying that you're doing this work in the other next bill, so you don't want to duplicate it and all that thing and stuff. So therefore, you have no problem with this amendment if it was in the next bill.
We'll come back to that in just a moment. Deputy Catherine Conway, let the Minister reply to each of these.
Thank you, Minister. It's my first time on this committee, and it's very interesting to listen to it. But just on that review, I would hope Deputy O'Leary would push it, or if not, that we would come back to it at the report stage, because I think it's essential to have a review clause with every piece of legislation. Now, I hear what you said, that, like my colleague has said, you put it in context that this is interim legislation and that you will be coming back. But in that context, I re-echo what Deputy Pringle has just said. Are you against the idea of a review in principle? I understand you're saying this is interim, so there's no need for it. But lately, in relation to the parole bill, we asked for a review, and the Minister said no in relation to the review. Then a standing order was quoted that reviews take place annually. I think standing order 64 or 164. It's extremely limited, that review. So I think, Minister, there's an attitude generally with various departments that a review is not necessary, really, because it's an extra burden on the department. But it seems to me that it's an essential part of any piece of legislation if we're genuinely interested in effect and change. Although I understand if this is interim, I can see the caution. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Conley. Good to go back to the Minister. Minister, please.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts here on this. On the issue of gambling addiction and research and treatment, the Department of Justice and Equality doesn't have the health expertise to do treatment. We have actually, as Deputy Chambers has alluded, we have stepped up by providing funding for research to find out what the issue is. We're doing that. And as colleagues here know, this department has as much legislation as the next 5 departments put together. So we don't have the expertise, and nor should we have the expertise to deal with treatment. The main piece of legislation, which I hope which we're working on at the moment, will provide for a social fund, which monies will be levied on the industry across the board, levies, and which will be then used, made available for, as I said earlier on, for treatment, for research, for education, for raising awareness and so forth. But that's the intention. But when it comes to actually treating people who have an illness, I would with respect suggest that that's not the remit of the Department of Justice. That's the remit of the Department of Health. So, and I can't agree with the Deputy that the Department of Health isn't interested. I know that my colleague Catherine is very interested in addiction services and is doing a lot of work in that area and bringing forward some very innovative and radical proposals on addiction. Now, with respect to the first amendment that's been proposed, we are actually at the moment carrying out research right now on drug prevalence. So that's ongoing under the HRB. So I don't see why we should actually repeat that. On Deputy Connolly's point, I don't have an actual. In fact, I agree with the Deputy that legislation should be actually reviewed and to see how effective it is. This bill is a small bill. It's updating an existing 56 Act. It's not doing anything major. We're undergoing major reform in this area, major reform. That's the piece that should be actually reviewed when it's published. This is a small internal piece of legislation, and as we've said, it's not doing a whole lot at the end of the day. What it's doing is important. There won't be a whole lot to review, really, you're upping the stakes and prizes. We still have to come back as to what that's going to mean. We're saying people under 18 can't put place bets. There are other conditions as well, as you've seen here. There's not a whole lot to review there, whereas the main piece of legislation is where I want to focus my attention. And to answer the Deputy's question, I actually do agree that legislation should be reviewed, but major pieces of legislation that have a massive impact. This is interim, and it's not going to make a major difference. It is important. But that's my view on that.
Okay, Deputy Pringle.
You didn't respond to my...
Sorry, what was that?
You didn't respond to me. I basically said that we're not reviewing this legislation, but will you include it in the next legislation?
Yeah, I certainly would be anxious to ensure that the next piece of legislation, which will establish a regulator, and which will also put in a lot of other conditions into the whole area of gambling, would be reviewed after an appropriate time to be decided, whether to be 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, depending. We can decide that, whoever is here at the time.
So we won't need to put forward an amendment for that, and so to happen it'll be...
I would be quite in favour of it happening, that piece of that whole area would be reviewed after a period of time. In fact, maybe even ongoing review, because it'll be so new.
It'll be in the bill.
That would be my intention. Yeah.
Anybody else? Deputy O'Leary, please.
So I wasn't aware of ongoing work in terms of the gambling prevalence studies, so if you can keep the House and the committee or whatever updated on it in that context while we vote. Yeah, I'm willing to withdraw it, and I suppose the point about a review. Now, having said that, I do think, if we're going to have a review mechanism in the gambling control bill when it comes, I do think it should take this bill as well. I know it's an interim piece. There is an element of licensing and so on involved in this. I do think that needs to be kept under review, but as part of a broader review of the Gambling Acts, I suppose is the way I would see it. But anyway, that's for future reference, and yeah, I withdraw on the amendment.
Thank you, Deputy Colm Brophy.
Vote on that.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'll go quickly in that case. As amendment number 11 has been withdrawn, there are no other amendments in section 27. That section 27 stand part of the bill. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. The title. That this be the title to the bill. An Act to amend the Gaming and Lotteries Act 1956 and the Betting Act 1931 and to provide for related matters. Is that agreed? Agreed. Caoimhghín. I beg your pardon. As consideration of the bill has been completed, in accordance with Standing Order 90, the following message will be sent to the Clerk of the Dáil. The Select Committee on Justice and Equality has completed its consideration of the Gaming and Lotteries Amendment Bill 2019 and has made no amendments thereto. I again thank the Minister and his officials for attending here this evening, and I want to thank all the members. We had a full attendance plus here, which indicates the interest and importance viewed of this particular area. So the Select Committee is adjourned sine die. We'll see you all back in the autumn.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chair.